Listen, I get being impressed by the biggest Thanksgiving box office return in history, and wanted to make some catchy portmanteau like Barbenheimer with Moana 2, Gladiator 2, and Wicked, but Moana Apocalypse and Glicked ain't it. Well, it's been a very happy Thanksgiving for Hollywood because the weekend numbers are in, and they're breaking all kinds of records. From the Hollywood Reporter, quote, thanks to the potent combination of Moana 2, Universal's Wicked, and Paramount's Gladiator 2, overall Thanksgiving revenue came in at north of $425 million for the 5 days in an unparalleled post-pandemic victory for the domestic box office. The previous record holder was Thanksgiving 2018, when domestic revenue reached $316 million. The Moana Apocalypse Glicked phenomenon, God, that sounds terrible, proves how much the market can expand when there are movies that have broad yet varied appeal, as Barbenheimer did last year. According to the box office company, the three films made up 75% of all showtimes, and ComScore is reporting that the year-over-year domestic revenue deficit has been slashed from 11% to 6% as a result of the holiday bounty. That's crazy. But it gets even crazier when you look at the numbers for Moana 2. I remember when the first one came out, it wasn't that big of a deal. It did okay, but it didn't bring it out of people. Well, the sequel did. It's broken all kinds of records, many of them by twice as much money. It's got the biggest 5-day debut of all time with $221 million, beating out the Super Mario Bros. Movie. It's the biggest 5-day Thanksgiving earner of all time, beating out Frozen 2 by $96 million. In fact, Moana 2 continued to whoop on Frozen 2, out-earning it for the biggest 5-day Thanksgiving nationwide opening, the biggest Thanksgiving Day gross of all time, the biggest Black Friday gross of all time, the biggest opening day for a Walt Disney Animation title, and the biggest Walt Disney Animation 3-day debut of all time. And then, just for fun, it beat out Super Mario Bros. Again for the biggest global opening of all time for an animated film. The success alone is just bananas because it's not clear what made Moana 2 so special, although the first film apparently was the most streamed film across all platforms in 2023. I'm sure that played a role, but it's still crazy that the film did this well because this is exactly the kind of film the culture critics say should fail. After all, it's got a female lead, minority characters, politically unpopular actors, and it's a Disney movie. According to them, it should have crashed and burned because it's filled with the message. Instead, it looks like their narrative fell apart, and not just with Moana 2. The Hollywood Reporter says, quote, Wicked alone grossed $118.2 million for the 5 days, after opening to a record-smashing $112 million last weekend, putting its domestic haul at $263.1 million through Sunday, and north of $360 million globally. In yet another milestone, the movie has passed up Grease to become the top Broadway musical adaptation of all time domestically. It's also the third biggest Thanksgiving haul behind Moana 2 and Frozen 2. Women made up the bulk of that audience, but they weren't the only ones to show up for the weekend. Men turned out for Gladiator 2, which opened the previous week. It's now sitting at $320 million globally. The culture critics claim that all three of these movies were supposed to tank and lose the audience, but instead the films did well and found their audiences, especially Wicked, which the culture critics really hate for some reason. I'm tempted to say it's because of the race swap for the main character, but that doesn't explain the intensity. I know actress Cynthia Erivo made some comments that pissed them off, especially with her reaction to someone editing the promo art for the film to make it look like the Broadway poster, but I still don't get their hate for the movie. It's based on a popular musical, and I'm pretty sure they're not the target audience for anything on Broadway, let alone musicals. I know none of them are interested in plays and musicals, and I'm 100% certain that none of them read Gregory Maguire's novel, which the musical adapted, so I don't get the fixation. I haven't heard much from the crowd about Moana 2, but it's definitely the type of movie they wouldn't like. However, they have been very vocal about Gladiator 2. It's full of historical inaccuracies, and for some reason, people are still shocked to find out that when Ridley Scott makes movies, he's not concerned about making them historically accurate. He'll get some stuff right, but if history doesn't serve his story, it goes bye-bye real fast. They're also obsessed with the film's budget, which is somewhere between $200 to $250 million. That's a lot of money to make back, but the culture critics latched onto this idea that if the movie isn't instantly profitable, then it should never be made. Well, okay, but every film isn't going to be a box office hit, and some find their audiences after they tank in theaters. This happens all the time, so no, films shouldn't only be made if studios think they'll have a guaranteed hit. Remember, Warner Brothers expected Barbie to tank. It was the highest grossing movie of 2023. You never know what will work, so you just gotta put stuff out there. Maybe it'll bomb, maybe it'll underperform, maybe it'll crush records. You never know. Now, the culture critics have a slightly better argument when it comes to the budget, because the budget for Gladiator 2 is crazy high. I'm sure the budget comes from the VFX and the practical sets and the actors' salaries, but it is a very expensive movie. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be made, but these people have their narrative and they're sticking to it. I haven't seen the film, so I don't know the scale of it, but judging from Ridley Scott's previous work, I don't know if he can make the type of movie he likes to make on a small budget. When you look at similar movies like Kingdom of Heaven, Robin Hood, Exodus, The Last Duel, and Napoleon, these are all $100 to $200 million budgets. I think Gladiator 2 is his most expensive film to date, but it looks like it's doing okay. Looking at the numbers, it'll probably tap out around $400 million. That's not a great return, but it is consistent with Ridley Scott's record. At any rate, Moana 2 looks like it's going to continue to soar. If it keeps tracking like this, it might catch up to Inside Out 2 and crack $1 billion. It might even surpass Inside Out 2's $1.7 billion. We'll have to see how it performs over the weeks. And overall, it looks like audiences love Moana 2, Gladiator 2, and Wicked, despite what the culture critics claim. The box office doesn't lie. However, sometimes people pushing the narrative do. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.